We have some pretty big news right now. Canada is turning elsewhere after the United States completely broke off trade talks because Donald Trump was furious over a Ronald Reagan ad produced by Ontario, which used Ronald Reagan's words against Donald Trump. Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, says, "We're going to develop new partnerships and opportunities, including with economic giants in Asia." Mark Carney was speaking to reporters on the tarmac before leaving on a trip, and he said, "We can't control the trade policy of the United States. We recognize that policy has fundamentally changed from the policy of the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. And it's a situation where the United States has tariffs against every one of their trading partners. What we can control is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia." So Canada is looking to Asian countries to develop those partnerships because the United States of America has left Canada and that relationship behind. A pretty significant shift happening right now. So spread the word. Full updates as always, Substack, link in bio, subscribe for free, follow along for more.
Hi lovelies, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Belinda Verse or Belly Dirt channel. Don't forget to please subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so that anytime I upload videos, you will be the first person to be notified. To my returning subscribers, to those people that share my videos, leave commentaries, and educate each and every one of us, you guys are the real MVP. So lovelies, I'm gonna be your today's host, and I have so many statistics to put up here, and we are gonna come out to talk about it. Alright lovelies, let's dive into today's video.
Trump's going to have to be careful here, only because, look at Mark Carney, he has very tight ties with China. If these negotiations keep stopping and starting, he's going to force Canada into dealing more with China. The talks are already happening in our country right now, folks. If America's going to pull out all their American auto manufacturing, let's just replace it with Chinese auto manufacturing. Those talks are already happening. And you have a liberal government who refuses to develop their own resources, refuses to build pipelines, refuses to actually try and get their product to other markets. What's that going to force them to do? They're going to rely on what they know, and they're going to reestablish and deepen ties with China. This isn't good for Canada. This is definitely not good for the United States. And this is where this whole thing is, you got to be cautious. This is super dangerous for Canada and the United States. I do not want to see my country driven into the arms of China. Is it completely on liberals? Yes. Do they have to go work with China? No. But if they're given an option to and they're given a choice to, they will, because they love China.
What we can control is how we build here at home. And what we can also control, or at least heavily influence, is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia, which is the focus of this trip.
China has just made a bold move. It will no longer use the US dollar to pay for iron ore imports from Australia, switching to the Chinese yuan. Instead, the news sent shockwaves through global markets. After all, China is the world's largest iron ore importer, so this shift not only caught Australia off guard, but also made investors rethink how global trade is priced and settled. Why is this such a big deal? For decades, major commodities have been priced in US dollars, reinforcing the dollar's dominance in international trade. By using the yuan for such a key import, China is taking a major step toward trade diversification, reducing reliance on the dollar. So for Australia, the impact is significant. Iron ore exports are the backbone of its economy, and China is its biggest customer. Switching to yuan-based transactions means Australian companies must adapt to new settlement systems, exchange rates, and financing mechanisms. While that poses challenges, it also brings opportunities. They can participate more directly in the yuan trade network and reduce risks tied to dollar fluctuations. From a global perspective, this shift could accelerate efforts by other countries to diversify settlement currencies, especially across Asia, where local currency trade is gaining traction. This isn't about abandoning the dollar overnight. It's a new experiment in reshaping global trade dynamics. The growing use of the yuan in international settlements reflects the market's search for stability and efficiency. In the long run, the country that can offer the most reliable and convenient financial system for global trade could take the lead in the next phase of economic competition.
So, because of these advantages, over decades our economy grew steadily more integrated with the United States through the Free Trade Agreement of the 1980s, the NAFTA Accord of the 1990s, and eventually USMCA agreement signed in 2018. Canada's trade increased by over 400% during that period, and our economy doubled in size. But this process This decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship with the United States is now over. And as a consequence, many of our former strengths as a country, former strengths more particularly as our economy, strengths based on close ties to America, have become our vulnerabilities. And as a result of that, the jobs of workers in our industries most affected by the U.S. tariffs in autos and steel and lumber are under threat. And our businesses are holding back investments restrained by the pall of uncertainty that's hanging over all of us. Our relationship with the United States will never again be the same as it was, even though in this new world of protectionism, we have the best trade deal of any other country, and we're working to make it even better still. Now, at the same time that all of this is happening, technology is changing the way we work, live, and communicate. When I was in graduate school, the World Wide Web, as we then called it, was that was the modern term of the information superhighway, if you ever heard of that. The World Wide Web, as we then called it, was just beginning. We used pen and paper in class. We talked on the telephone to each other. And we talked about the same news stories, the same movies, the same bands. My generation was connected by wires, yours is connected by code, and yet our society today is becoming ever more disconnected. Our public square is fragmented by online echo chambers, where truth and fiction can be hard to tell apart, and where contrasting ideas tend to polarize, not persuade. Now, in the context of all this, as Canadians, we have relearned some key lessons over the course of the past year. First, we have to take care of ourselves because we can't rely on one foreign partner. We have to take care of each other because we are stronger together. And we've learned that now is not the time to be cautious because fortune favors the bold.
It was significant that recently that Prime Minister Carney talked about the trade risks in our relationship with the United States and our need to manage that relationship. And he basically said that it was similar to the risks that we face with China. That's an extraordinary thing to say, because we just remember just a few years ago when the United States pushed Canada to arrest Meng Wanzhou, the head of Huawei, because the Americans were fighting with China over the control of the digital space and wanted Huawei out of the market. And Canada agreed to arrest Meng Wanzhou for extradition to the United States. China retaliated heavily. They arrested and imprisoned 2 Canadians, the 2 Michaels, held them in custody for way too long. There was a huge public outcry that resulted in a backlash in Canada against Chinese imports, against the Chinese government. China has a pretty dubious track record in terms of human rights.
This is unreal. Y'all saw that, right? The Canadian president just came out, the prime minister just came out and said, sorry, USA, it's time for China now.
I know it's late, but President Trump posted late tonight that he is cutting off all trade negotiations with Canada because of their quote-unquote egregious behavior. What could be so egregious, you say? Well, it's this advertisement.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
So that's just part of the ad. The basic gist is they are using the voice of former President Ronald Reagan, who was notoriously a free trader and not a real big fan of tariffs. And they are using Reagan's speech from 1987 to sort of push back against President Trump's tariff policy, which, you know, the Canadians and the United States have been fighting over recently. Well, in a Truth Social post tonight, President Trump said that ad that the Canadians put out was fake. In fact, he reposted a statement from the Ronald Reagan Foundation, which also said that the Canadians took President Reagan's speech out of context, and they didn't ask the library's permission to use Reagan's voice in this multi-million-dollar, multinational television ad. So, is it fake? Did Reagan actually say that? Well, I found the actual speech from April of 1987, and I'm going to just play you the full context of what former President Reagan said about tariffs back then. You get to be the judge.
Now, that message of free trade is one I conveyed to Canada's leaders a few weeks ago, and it was warmly received there. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery. You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity. Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group, who forget that more than 5 million American jobs are directly tied to the foreign export business, and additional millions are tied to imports.
I know it's late, but President Trump posted late tonight that he is cutting off all trade negotiations with Canada because of their quote-unquote egregious...
Let's start with the reality. The relationship between the United States and Canada has officially entered uncharted territory. For decades, these two nations were like twin engines driving North America trade. But right now, one engine has decided it no longer wants to fly information. Donald Trump's decision to cut off trade talks with Canada over a political ad, yes, an ad, is more than just impressive politics. It's a geopolitical earthquake. Because when a nation like Canada, with one of the most stable economies and strongest trade ties to the US, starts looking east toward Asia and China, that is not just a pivot, that is a redirection of history. Trump's anger over a Ronald Reagan ad from Ontario might sound petty on the surface, but underneath it, there is a dangerous reality. This isn't just about one ad, it's about Trump's worldview, one where America doesn't do compromise, only control. And when that country sleeps, he pulls the plug. So now, Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has said what most leaders hesitate to say aloud. We can't control the trade policy of the United States, but what we can control is building a new partnerships, including with the economic giant of Asia. In simple terms, the US is out, Asia is in. And the timing couldn't be more consequential, because just days before this, China made one of its boldest moves in decades. It stopped using the US dollar to pay for iron oral imports from Australia, switching instead to the Chinese yuan. That is massive. Why? Because China is the largest iron ore importer in the world. And when the biggest buyer decides to stop using the US dollar, the global market starts asking a very uncomfortable question. Is the dollar dominance beginning to crumble? For decades, commodities, oil, gold, gas, steel, iron have all been priced in dollars. That system called the petrodollar has kept America powerful. But when countries start trading in other currency, it chips away at that foundation. And that is exactly what China is doing, piece by piece, transaction by transaction, trade deal by trade deal. Now, combine that with what is happening in Canada. Trump's trade war tantrum might be exactly what pushes a Western island to like Canada into China open arms, because let's be honest, Canada needs trade. Their economic relies heavily on exports: oil, gas, lumber, autos, and minerals. If the United States closes its doors, Canada is not going to sit around waiting for Trump to calm down. They will go find another buyer, and right now, the biggest buyers on the planet are in Asia: China, India, South Korea, Japan. But here is the deeper layer here. McConnell isn't just a new politician, he's a former Bank of England governor, a man with deep ties to global finance, and yes, strong relationship within China economic circles. When someone like Connell says, "We are developing new partnership in Asia," that is not a random diplomatic statement. That is policy being re-engined at the highest level. And this is where it gets dangerous, not just for Canada, but for the West as a whole. Because if Canada starts leaning toward Chinese trade, the United States loses leverage over one of its closest allies. Imagine a future where Canada auto manufacturing plant hasn't powered by American investments but by Chinese companies, Chinese technology, and Chinese financing. Imagine Chinese EVs being assembled in Ontario instead of American ones from Merkel or Ohio. That is the real consequences of what is happening right now. And the irony is self-inflicted. Trump's trade-first nationalism has always been rooted in the idea that America must protect its industries, but in practice, it often isolates them. Every time the US walks away from a trade partner, that partner doesn't just disappear. They adapt, they find a new allies. We have seen this before when the US pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership under Trump's first term. The remaining countries didn't collapse. They formed the CPTPP, a rebranded version of the deal that moved forward without America. The world adjusted, trade continued, and America lost influence. This feels like deja vu. Right now, Canada is adjusting, and while Trump is focused on revenge politics and protecting American factories, China is playing a long, quiet, and calculated game. Every trade dispute that pushes a country away from the US is a door opening for China. And let's not forget, Canada's Liberal government has been historically reluctant to develop its own natural resources, pipelines, oil exports, refineries. They have preferred environmental diplomacy over industry expansion. That means they are always in need of external buyers. And if America stops buying, the only option left is Asia. That is how China wins, not through war, not through weapons, but through necessities. Now, the shift to the yuan in iron ore trading is another layer of the same story. It's China saying to the world, you don't have to use the US dollar anymore. We have built the system, we have built the banks, we have built the digital currency networks trade directly with us. For Australia, that is a shock. For the US, is an omen, and for Canada, is an opportunity. Because if China can buy iron ore in yuan, it can just as easily buy Canadian minerals, timber, or even oil in yuan. And that is where the real transformation begins. The slow decoupling from the dollar. Let's break down what that means practically. When countries trade in dollars, they need to hold large reserves of US currency. That gives America leverage, financial, political, and even military. Sanctions, for example, only work because dollar dominance. But if nations start holding yuan or conducting trade through alternative systems, Washington leverage weakens. That is why this Canada-China story isn't just a trade headline. It's a symptom of something larger, a global shift from unipolar world dominated by the United States to a multipolar world where nations like China, Russia, and India set their own financial terms. Now, to be clear, Canada doesn't want to become China's puppet. Nobody in Ottawa dreams of that. But politics isn't about what you want, it's about what you need. And if the US is closing doors and Asia is opening them, politicians like McKenna are going to walk through those open doors. The irony here is that both Trump and Canada are reacting emotionally, one out of anger, the other out of opportunity. Trump wants control, Canada wants stability, and between those two instincts lies a dangerous crossroad for North America. Because while the US is arguing over who offended who, China is locking in long-term economic partnership that could shape the next century. Think about this. Once the countries start trading in yuan, once they integrate into China's financial systems, it's not easy to back out. The infrastructure, the digital payment rails, the bilateral swap agreements, the banking ties all become part of the country's economic DNA. So if Canada joins that network, even partially, the US doesn't just lose a trade deal, it loses influence. And it's not just about money, it's about ideology. For decades, the US and the Canada stood side by side promoting liberal democracy, Western values, free markets, and open trade. But if that alliance fractures, if Canada starts blending its trade with authoritarian economies, that moral high ground gets muddy. The world starts to see democracy not as a strength, but as an unstable luxury that can be abandoned when convenient. That is what is at stake here. And while some people will say it's just a trade part, it will blow over. Remember, history changes quietly. Alliances end not with wars, but with trade deals. Empires fall not with invasion, but with lost markets. The Roman Empire didn't collapse in a day. It eroded through debts, overreach, and broken alliances. The same principle applies here. The US isn't collapsing, but it's losing the glue that held its dominance together. Trust, trade, and consistency. Now, step back and think globally. We are watching a trifecta of events. The US alienating alliance through tariffs and unpredictability, China offering stability and currency alternatives, and countries like Canada stuck in the middle, choosing the path of least resistance. The future of trade is shifting eastward, and once that monumental builds, it's almost impossible to resolve. By the time Washington realizes what is happening, Beijing might already be setting the new rules. So yes, Trump's trade policy may feel patriotic to some, but they are strategically self-defeating, because every war America builds pushes another ally into China's arms. And if Canada, the US oldest ally, starts deepening those ties, then the world has officially entered a post-America era of trade. And that is not speculation anymore, it's happening right now.
And if you watch up to this extent, don't forget to please leave me your own thought in the comment section of what you think of this video. And please do not forget that we do not support any form of bullying and harassment. We are just here for educational and informative purposes. So lovelies, why not just share your thought? Subscribe to this channel if you're yet to do that, and I will see you lovelies when I upload the next one.